So has the Bible been corrupted? Well, to borrow an Aussie phrase, yeah, nah. From the inception of the church to now, the books that came to make up the New Testament have been copied and translated thousands of times. This long textual history of the Bible, though, it leaves a lot of people wondering whether the original message hasn't somehow been lost in translation. That perhaps later scribes embellished the gospel stories to justify their own theological tribe, or perhaps they gerrymandered Jesus' words to suit a political agenda. Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code, it claimed that the Catholic Church altered the Gospels to hide the truth about Jesus. Muslims claim that Jesus' original statements about his own divinity or his death by crucifixion have been inserted centuries later. And Bart Ehrman, an agnostic and renowned textual critic, has implied that the New Testament's original words have been lost in a mess of manuscripts, with more corruptions in the copies than there are words in the New Testament. So how does the Christian story stand up under textual scrutiny? Has the Bible been corrupted? Now, my answer as a Christian, it might surprise you. Yes. Focusing specifically on the New Testament, I fully admit that the original documents penned by the apostles and their missionary colleagues have either been lost or destroyed by the sands of time. And that in the centuries-long process of making copies and copies of the copies, that the text we do have has been corrupted. And not just a few times, but over 400,000 times. But as crazy as that may sound, here are 3 reasons why, speaking as a Christian, I'm confident that our modern Bibles can in fact be trusted. Number 1, the vast treasury of New Testament copies enables textual critics to confidently reconstruct the originals. See, the reason why textual critics have catalogued some 400,000 corruptions is because we have so many copies of the originals in our possession. To date, according to the official register called The List at the Institute for New Testament Textual Research, we have somewhere north of 5,000 New Testament manuscripts in their original language, Koine Greek. We have a handful of incomplete fragments from the 2nd century AD and dozens from the 3rd, mostly of the Gospels. But by the 4th century AD, we have our first complete New Testaments, the Codex Sinaiticus and the Codex Vaticanus. And from there, our existing Greek manuscripts, they start to balloon, with nearly 1,000 copies by 1000 AD now in our possession. And when you add to that list all of the translations into other languages, like Coptic and Aramaic, Syriac and Latin, our numbers multiply, elevating the library of New Testament manuscripts into a league of its own compared to other works of ancient literature, whether Homer's myths or Plato's dialogues, both in the number of manuscripts and in how close the copies are to the originals. In addition to the New Testament manuscripts themselves, we also have the voluminous writings of the early church fathers across the first 4 centuries AD. Christians who quote the New Testament nearly 1 million times collectively in their corpus, and who we can geographically locate to show how far and fast the New Testament documents spread across the ancient world. A textual criticism, then, is the historical science which compares these sources to identify where corruptions, what the scholars called textual variants, have entered into the long history of transmission. The more copies they have and the closer those copies are to the original, and the greater the geographical spread of where those copies came from, the more these scholars are able to confidently reconstruct what was originally written. So the high number of corruptions or textual variants actually turns out to be a good thing, because it's representative of the vast treasury of sources for the New Testament in our possession. Our critical reconstruction of the New Testament using this method is so reliable that despite the past 100 years of discovering new manuscripts, the standard text, now called the USB 5, has remained substantively the same with only minor alterations. So what does this mean? Well, there is little doubt that the English translation you hold in your hands today reliably reflects what was penned by the apostolic community in the 1st century. Number 2, textual variants do not alter the core of the Christian story. So let's break down Bart Ehrman's scary 400,000 figure of textual variants. When you realize that a complete copy of the New Testament in Greek averages out to be about 450 pages long, and that we currently have 2.6 million pages of manuscripts in our database, it turns out that the scribes were remarkably meticulous in their copies, only making mistakes about as often as you might expect for such a painstakingly long process in less than ideal conditions. Textual critics break down these variants into categories. A meaningful variant is one that changes the meaning of a sentence. A viable variant is one that we have good reasons to believe could be original, being attested to in the earliest or most reliable families of manuscripts. As it stands, the vast majority, over 99% of textual variants, are either not meaningful, like spelling errors or changes in word order, or they're not viable, appearing in a manuscript with a late date or a more suspect pedigree. So what about the others? After all, 1% of 400,000, that's still a lot of meaningful and viable differences, right? So has the Bible's message been corrupted? Well, in short, no. These variants affect only 40 lines of Greek text, all of which are readily identified in a decent study Bible. It's the reason why 3 passages in particular, the long ending of Mark's Gospel in chapter 16, the story of the woman caught in adultery in John chapter 7 to 8, and an excerpt from 1 John 5, have either been omitted or bracketed out from modern translations. But the core of the Christian story, God's existence, his triune nature, the incarnation of the eternal Son as Jesus, his messianic ministry, his claims to divinity, his death, burial, and resurrection from the dead, his future return to set everything right and to restore justice through judgment, none of these beliefs are called into question in any of the variant passages. So number 3, there is no evidence of a vast conspiracy to corrupt the New Testament. Christianity is undoubtedly a missionary religion. Jesus' last standing orders to his closest friends and followers, as recorded in the Gospels and the book of Acts, was to take the good news of the Christian story and to spread it to every tribe and every tongue in every nation. Which is why, even when the original documents were around, copies were made and translated, just so people on the other side of the world can read it in their own native language. To believe that the Bible has been corrupted the way that Dan Brown or Muslim scholars claim would require all of these copies, which spread out rapidly over a vast empire and were quoted by early church fathers on different continents in different languages, would have to be tracked down and changed. A mammoth conspiracy with zero historical evidence to support it, and a wealth of historical evidence to contradict it. So has the Bible been corrupted? Well, to borrow an Aussie phrase, yeah, nah. Thanks to the meticulous work of an untold number of dedicated scribes before the invention of the printing press, and to the hard work of textual critics today, we can readily identify where corruptions, accidental or intentional, entered into our wealth of manuscripts, and reconstruct the New Testament with a high degree of confidence. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to believe it. Just because we know what the apostolic community in the first century actually said, doesn't mean that what they penned was true. Which is why you should check out our other video, Can I Trust the Bible? But what you can say is that we need to put to bed forever this conspiracy theory that our New Testament has been corrupted beyond recovery. Through his own paradoxical means, God has preserved the scriptures. Dan here from Questioning Christianity. Thanks so much for checking us out. We are all about helping you connect the Christian story to life's deepest questions. So if you're enjoying the content, make sure you subscribe and click the bell on YouTube, and then go ahead and follow us on socials.